Clara Whitmore pressed her sister's cruel letter against her chest and laughed, not because it was funny, but because it finally made sense. Her hands were shaking. Ink still smelled fresh. Her own family had entered her name into a mail-order bride advertisement as a joke. 24 years of breathing, working, praying, being reduced to a punchline written in her sister's perfect handwriting. She could have burned the letter. She could have cried. Clara picked up a pen. If this story moves something inside you, subscribe. Stay until the very end and drop your city in the comments. Let's see exactly how far this story travels. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late October of 1887. Letters had slipped beneath the door of Clara Whitmore's bedroom while the rest of the house was still warm with sleep and the smell of biscuits. It was addressed in her sister Margaret's handwriting, lupin, confident, beautiful, the same way Margaret herself had always been. And when Clara cracked open the envelope, what she pulled out made her chest go completely hollow. A copy of an advertisement, cut from a Wyoming Territory newspaper. Folded into thirds and tucked behind it was a note, also in Margaret's hand. Don't worry, Clara Bear. That's your little portrait, too. The one from Aunt Helen's birthday, the one where you forgot to smile. We figured if anyone deserves a Wyoming cattle rancher, it's you. And then at the bottom, in a different ink, Josephine's handwriting. Sharper. We all had a vote, even Mother. Agreed. You're welcome. Clara read the note 3 times. Not because she didn't understand it the first time. She understood it perfectly on the first read. She read it 3 times because she was waiting to feel something other than a deep, blissful calm, the kind of calm that sits in the eye of a storm, fairly still, while everything around it prepares to collapse. She set the letter on her dressing table. She walked to the window. The Missouri morning was doing what October mornings always did, painting the treetops copper and gold. Air off the river curled through the low places, making the world look exactly like something from a painting that belonged in someone else's house. Clara's house, not Clara Whitmore's window. The beautiful things in this world, she had been told in 100 quiet, polished ways over the course of her 24 years, were not meant for her. They were meant for Margaret, auburn hair, and her easy laugh. They were meant for Josephine, her quick wit, and the way she could enter a room and immediately make every man in it forget what he had been saying. They were meant for her mother, now at 52, still elegant, still sharp. Clara was the other one. She had always been the other one. They turned away from the window. Pia picked up the letter again, and this time she read the advertisement itself. Seeking a wife of honest character and dependable nature. Must be willing to relocate to Wyoming Territory. Ranch life is demanding. I am not a romantic man, but I am a fair one. Uninterested women may write to Caldwell Ranch, County, Wyoming Territory. That was it. No flowery promises, no descriptions of wealth or comfort or the beautiful land waiting to be shared. Just a man stating plainly what he needed and what he offered, which was nothing extravagant, nothing designed to impress, just fairness. Clara sat down on the edge of her bed. She read the advertisement one more time, and she thought, he sounds like someone who is tired of pretending. She knew that feeling. She had been living inside it for 24 years. She waited. She said nothing at breakfast. She passed the butter when Margaret asked for it, and she complimented her mother on the biscuits, and she listened to Josephine describe in exhaustive detail the expression on Thomas Whitfield's face when he had seen her new dress at the Harmon gathering the previous Saturday. She did all of these things with the same quiet care she always brought to the work of surviving her own family. When the candles were lit, the good china was out because their father had come home in a good mood. Clara set the letter on the table beside her plate and looked at Margaret. Margaret looked back at her. For a single second, something flickered in Margaret's expression. Not guilt. Margaret was not built for guilt in the way most people understood it. It was something closer to surprise, the specific surprise of a person who has fired a gun in what they assumed was a safe direction and suddenly realized there might have been a window there. Sweetheart, their mother began. her voice carrying the particular tone she used when she was trying to smooth something over before it became an actual scene. It was only meant in fun. I know what it was meant as, Clara said. Her voice was quiet. It was always quiet. That was one of the things her family used against stillness, her still quietness, the way she never seemed to fill a room the way the others did, as though stillness was the same thing as emptiness. At her father. Her father, Charles Whitmore, of substantial means and moderate kindness, who had spent most of Clara's life genuinely unable to see her except in relation to her sister's brightness, the way you sometimes can't quite make out a star if you're staring directly at the moon. Mother, she said, did you know about this? The silence that answered her was its own kind of answer. There cleared his throat. He picked up his fork. Back down. Now, Clara, your sister's only... I received a response, Clara said. Stopped everything. Margaret's fork hovered halfway between her plate and her mouth. Josephine's eyes went wide. Her mother's hand, which had been reaching for the wine glass, simply stopped moving midair. What? Margaret said. Just a one word. He wrote back, Clara said. She smoothed the letter flat on the table beside her plate, though she did not push it toward anyone. She simply let them all see it sitting there. Caldwell wrote back. He accepted. Josephine made a sound that was almost a laugh, and then caught it and turned it into a cough. What? That's not possible. You haven't even... He accepted the photograph, Clara said. Accepted the description, and he would like for me to come to Wyoming before winter sets in. That's absurd, Margaret said. Her voice had found its footing, that smooth, authoritative register she used when she was reestablishing the natural order of things. Clara, you can't possibly be considering... I'm not considering it, Clara said. She looked at her sister steadily, the way she had looked at 100 things in her life that had tried to diminish her, and she let the silence rest for exactly 3 full seconds before she finished the sentence. Already written back. The dining room went so quiet that Clara could hear the fire in the grate. Josephine's voice had gone thin. I accepted his offer, Clara said. I would arrive by the end of November, Clara. Her mother's voice was different now. The smoothing overtone was gone. What was underneath it was something more complicated, not precisely maternal concern, something adjacent to it, something that might have been actual alarm. You do not know this man. He is a stranger. This entire situation began as a misunderstanding. It began as a joke, Clara said, but precisely. Let's be accurate. Her mother closed her mouth. Clara said. She picked up her fork. I would appreciate it if someone would pass the potatoes. For a long moment, no one moved. Then her father, of all people, her quiet, moon-blinded father, passed the potatoes. She packed light, always packed light, even emotionally. She had spent so many years learning how to travel through her own family without carrying too much of herself into rooms that didn't want her there. 2 dresses, her good coat, the book of poetry her grandmother had left her, the one with the cracked spine in pencil on the inside cover that read, in her grandmother's handwriting, for Clara. The one who actually reads. She sat on the edge of her stripped bed the night before her departure and held that book for a long time, afraid of leaving. That was the thing that surprised her most about herself in those final days. Everyone seemed to expect her to be afraid. There hovered with a particular kind of worried energy that Clara had never seen her direct at her before. And she was not entirely certain whether her mother was worried about Clara's safety or about the story that would be told at church once Clara was gone. Josephine avoided her almost entirely, which was its own admission of something. Margaret came to her room on the second to last night and stood in the doorway and said, "You're making a mistake." Clara looked up from her packing. "Going to be disappointed," Margaret said, "when he sees you in person. When he realizes he made this decision based on..." She stopped. Her eyes moved to the photograph on Clara's dressing table, the one from Aunt Helen's birthday, the unflattering one, the one they had sent as a joke, based on very limited information. Clara considered her sister for a moment. Margaret was beautiful in the way that certain things are beautiful, completely, effortlessly, and with an absolute expectation of being recognized as such. She had never once in her life had to wonder whether she was enough. Clara had wondered it every single day. Maybe, Clara said, or maybe he'll be relieved. Relieved, Margaret repeated, as if the word were in a language she didn't speak. I'm exactly who I said I was. Clara said, no more, or less. Margaret looked at her for another moment. Then she turned and walked back down the hallway without another word. Claire went back to her packing. That night, alone in the house, she had grown up in the house where she had been the shadow, note, the one who was always almost enough, and never quite she did not cry. She sat very still in the dark, and she listened to the sounds of the house settling around her, the old creaks and sighs of the walls and the floors about Wyoming. She did not know what Wyoming was going to give her, but she knew what Missouri had already taken. The train ride from Missouri to Wyoming territory took 3 days. Clara had a window seat for most of it, which she was grateful for. Not because the view was particularly comforting. It gave her somewhere to put her eyes that wasn't directly on the other passengers, of whom seemed to find a woman traveling alone worthy of sustained examination. She read Ethan Caldwell's letter so many times during those 3 days that she had memorized it by the time the Missouri border disappeared behind her. It was not a long letter. It was 3 paragraphs. But she had studied it the way she studied the few things in her life that had ever felt genuinely important with attention, agenda, simply trying to understand what was actually being said beneath the careful surface of the words. Miss Whitmore, I received your letter and your photograph. I will be direct with you because I believe directness is a form of respect that most people undervalue. I'm 41 years old. I lost my wife 4 years ago. I run a cattle ranch in Sweetwater County that employs 14 men and covers approximately 6,000 acres. Work is difficult and the winters are hard, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. I am not searching for a romantic arrangement. I am searching for a partner, who can manage a household, make decisions when I am occupied with the land, and be honest with me, even when honesty is uncomfortable. I realize this may not be the kind of letter that excites a woman. I have found that false excitement tends to lead to real disappointment. I have had enough disappointment to last me the remainder of my life. If you are still willing after reading this, I will send for travel funds. If you are not, I understand completely. Either way, I wish you well. Respectfully, Ethan Caldwell. She had read 100 letters in her life. She had been the one who sorted the family correspondence and who drafted her mother's social replies, the one who had read enough smooth and practiced words to know exactly what they were trying to conceal. Caldwell's letter was not trying to conceal anything. That was what made it extraordinary. He had said, I have had enough disappointment to last me the remainder of my life. Put that in a letter to a stranger. Most men spent their entire lives building careful walls around exactly that kind of admission. This man had put it in writing and sent it to an unknown woman in Missouri because he apparently decided that honesty was more important than dignity. Clara found that almost unbearably moving. By the time the train crossed into Nebraska, she had made a private decision that she was going to be as honest with Ethan Caldwell as he had been with her. Performances, no careful management of impressions, to walk off that train in Wyoming and simply be exactly who she was, quiet and plain and sharp-minded and steady, and whatever he made of that was going to be the truth between them from the beginning. She pressed his letter back into her coat pocket. Outside the window, the land was opening up in a way she had never seen. It was beautiful in an enclosed, intimate way, trees and rivers, and rolling hills that felt like rooms. This was different. This was the kind of landscape that asked something of you. It stretched and kept stretching, and there was nothing to hide behind. High above it was enormous in a way that felt almost threatening until you spent enough time looking at it and realized it wasn't threatening at all. It was honest. Clara had never thought of a landscape as honest before. She thought, maybe this is the right place for me after all. The station at Rock Springs was smaller than she had expected and colder than she had prepared for, and there were exactly 4 people on the platform when Clara stepped off the train with her 2 bags and her grandmother's book of poetry tucked under her arm. At him immediately. She would have known him even without the letter, even without any description, because he was the only person on that platform who was not pretending to be doing something else. Everyone else was engaged in the elaborate theater of waiting, checking watches, phone bags, speaking to companions. Ethan Caldwell was simply standing, watching. He was tall, as she had expected, with the kind of build that came from years of actual physical work rather than any deliberate effort at it. It was heavy and dark and practical. His face was not unkind. That was the word she settled on immediately. Not unkind. He was watching her, and she realized with a small jolt that he had recognized her immediately too. She walked toward him. She made herself hold his gaze because she had promised herself honesty. Looking away first would have been a kind of small dishonesty, a performance of humility she didn't feel. You're halfway, Miss Whitmore, he said. Not a question. Recognition, Mr. Caldwell, she said. I apologize. No, the photograph was not particularly flattering. Something shifted in his expression. It was very subtle, a slight movement around the eyes, a smile, not quite surprise, something in between. I appreciated the photograph, he said. Most women send the best one they have. Sharing photograph tells me what a woman wants me to think of her. The other kind, he paused. The other kind tells me something closer to who she actually is. Clara was quiet for a moment. That's a very unusual way of seeing things, she said. Hold, he said. He picked up one of her bags. Wagons this way. We've got about 2 hours before the temperature drops, and I'd like to be home before that happens. He turned and started walking. Clara watched him for one unobserved second. The set of his shoulders, the particular straightness of his back that suggested a man who carried a great deal of weight and had simply decided to stop letting it show, and she thought it was going to be genuinely hard and genuinely real. And that is exactly what I came here for. She picked up her second bag and followed him. It was bigger than she had expected and quieter than she had been prepared for. A working ranch in Wyoming in late November was not quiet the way a library was quiet or the way a church was quiet. Quiet the way a thing is quiet when it has learned to hold a great deal inside itself without releasing any of it. The main house had clearly been cared for. It was clean, clearly functional, but it felt like a house that had forgotten something and wasn't quite sure what it was. There was a woman named Agnes who had apparently been managing the household for the 2 years since Ethan's wife had passed. Agnes was in her late 60s, compact and direct, and she looked Clara over with the frank assessment of a woman who had seen a great deal and had decided long ago that she didn't have time to pretend she hadn't. On the tour, Agnes said. It was not precisely a question, as Clara said. And then I'll want to know what doesn't work and what you've been meaning to fix and haven't had time to. Agnes stopped walking, turned and looked at Clara with an expression that was almost startled. Women ask where the parlor is, Agnes said. I'd like to see the parlor too, Clara said. I'd like to understand what I'm actually walking into before I start arranging the furniture. Agnes looked at her for another second. Then she made a sound that was not quite a laugh, more like the sound you make when something has surprised you and you don't want to give it too much credit yet. Kitchen first, Agnes said. The stove drafts when the wind is from the north. Been meaning to have someone look at it for 6 months. Show me, Clara said. That evening, after a plain dinner that Clara helped Agnes prepare without being asked, Ethan from the last of his evening rounds and found Clara at the kitchen table with Agnes's household ledger open in front of her and a list of questions written in her own hand on a separate piece of paper. In the doorway, Agnes said, you'd been at that for an hour, he said. Supply ordering system needs reorganizing, Clara said. You're duplicating about a third of your orders because the records from one season aren't being carried over correctly. I think it's been costing you, though I'd need another day with the ledgers to be certain. He crossed the kitchen and looked over her shoulder at the ledger. She was acutely aware of how close he was standing, uncomfortably close, but present in a way that she noticed. You read ledgers, he said. It was not exactly surprise, nothing more careful than surprise. My father is a businessman, she said. Organized his correspondence for 7 years. You pick things up. He was quiet for a moment. Around, then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. What else did you pick up? He said. Clara looked at him across the table. Lamplight, his face was less guarded than it had been at the train station. Open, she didn't think this man would be easily open, but less guarded. The house, or the late hour, or something about this particular kitchen with its drafty north wind stove, made the armor slightly less necessary. I can tell when someone is saying what they mean, she said. The rhetorics, and when they're saying what they think they're expected to say. He was quiet again. Which was I doing, he said, in that letter. The first one, she said. They were saying exactly what you meant. That's why I came. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Outside, the Wyoming wind moved against the walls of the house. Lamp on the table made the shadows shift slightly. Caldwell looked at Clara Whitmore across a kitchen ledger in the late November, cold of a life he was trying to rebuild. And something in his expression changed, not dramatically, in the way of stories where everything pivots on a single visible moment. Quieter than that. It was the look of a man who has been carrying something alone for a very long time, and has just met someone who might be willing to help him carry it. Really does draft badly, he said. I know, she said. I'll figure it out. He nodded once. He stood up. He said good night and went to his room. And Clara sat alone at the kitchen table for another hour with the ledger and her list of questions and the lamp burning steadily against the Wyoming dark. And she did not feel afraid, and she did not feel small. She did not feel like someone's joke. She felt, for the first time in as long as she could remember, like someone who was exactly where she was supposed to be. Went into town for the first time 4 days after her arrival. Ethan had supplies to collect and business at the land office. And he asked. Clara noted, not instructed if she would like to come and see the area. She said yes, and she wore her good dress and her heavy coat, and she sat beside him on the wagon seat for the 40-minute drive into town without either of them feeling particular pressure to fill the silence. It was when she first began to understand that silence meant something different to Ethan Caldwell than it did to most people. Their family, silence had always been hostile, dismissive the space left behind when words ran out or when someone had decided she wasn't worth the effort. Ethan, silence was just comfortable, functional. The space between two people who didn't need to perform for each other. About that the whole way into town. The town of Millhaven was the kind of small western settlement that had grown up around necessity and not much else, a main street with the necessary businesses, a church, a saloon that everyone knew about, but no one officially acknowledged, and a social architecture that was every bit as rigid and hierarchical as anything Clara had left behind in Missouri, just expressed in different vocabulary. She felt the attention immediately when they stepped into the general store. Not subtle attention, the kind that moves through a room like a current, unto woman, quick and electric, before settling into a careful performance of not looking that fooled absolutely. No. Very clearly, the woman behind the dry goods counter say something quiet to the woman beside her. She did not hear the exact words, but she heard the register, the particular tone of amused assessment that she had heard directed at her for most of her life. 100 different rooms by 100 different versions of the same voice. She kept her face pleasant and her back straight. Ethan was speaking to the store owner, Mr. Pierce, about a feed order. Clara moved through the store, looking at what was available, making mental notes about what they needed that wasn't on Ethan's list. A few minutes, a woman appeared at her elbow. You must be the new Mrs. Caldwell, the woman said. She was perhaps 40, well-dressed in the way of someone who worked at being well-dressed rather than simply being it, with a smile that had been arranged for maximum social efficiency. Dorothy Pierce, my husband owns the store, Miss Whitmore, Clara said, yet married. Just finding our footing. Dorothy Pierce's smile adjusted almost imperceptibly. We've been, the whole town has been curious. When we heard Ethan had sent for a wife, we just, we expect herself, but she stopped herself. The pause was its own sentence. Something different? Clara offered gently. Dorothy's smile became briefly, unwillingly genuine, the expression of someone who has been caught being honest when they intended to be polite. I only meant that Ethan Caldwell he's a considerable figure in this county. Opinions about what might be right for him. People tend to have opinions about things that aren't their business, Clara said pleasantly. Well, it's very human. I do it myself sometimes. She picked up a jar of preserved peaches from the shelf beside her. Are these reliable? We're low on preserved fruit at the ranch, and I'd like to start building the winter stores. Dorothy Pierce blinked. They're very reliable. Mrs. Holt puts them up herself. I'll take 6 jars, Clara said. She carried them to the counter. And could you add them to the Caldwell account? I'll need to reconcile the household accounts with Mr. Caldwell at the end of the month, and it would be helpful to have everything centralized. She heard Ethan come up behind her. She didn't turn around, but she felt him there, that particular quality of someone's presence that you begin to learn after only a few days in a house with them. Dorothy, he said. Ethan. Dorothy Pierce's tone shifted entirely when she addressed him warmer, more careful, more precisely arranged. We were just getting acquainted. Good, Ethan said. He put his hand on the counter beside Clara, not on her, not touching her, but beside her, in a way that was not accidental. She's sharp. I'd recommend against underestimating her. It was such a small thing. A plain, quiet thing. He had not defended her or declared anything or made a scene. He had simply said a fact. In the tone he probably used to state facts about the weather or the grain supply. Dorothy Pierce heard it. Clara heard it. And Clara was standing at the counter of a general store in a town that had already decided what to make of her. Felt something loosen very slightly in her chest. Something she hadn't even known was tight. She met Victoria Hayes on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after her arrival. Victoria Hayes was the kind of woman Clara had grown up alongside, not precisely like her sisters, but from the same fundamental category. Beautiful in a way that had never had to question itself. Certain of her place in any room she entered. Accustomed to being the standard by which other women were measured. Arrived at the Caldwell Ranch in a very good carriage driven by a very good driver, wearing a coat that had not been made anywhere in Wyoming. And she walked in the front parlor where Clara was reorganizing the household inventory with the energy of someone who had been welcomed there many times before and expected to be welcomed again. Clara? You must be Clara, she said. Her voice was warm, the way expensive things are sometimes warm, with an underlying quality that reminded you of the cost. I've been meaning to come by and introduce myself. I'm Victoria Hayes. My father owns the Hayes spread 2 ridges over. I know who you are, Clara said. Plus, Agnes had mentioned Victoria Hayes in a way that told Clara more than Agnes probably realized. Clara glanced at the papers spread across the table. Are you doing the ranch accounts? The household accounts, Clara said. Supply ledger. I'm reorganizing the system. Victoria looked at the papers for a moment. Ethan has a foreman who handles the ranch accounts. I know, Clara said. And he handles them well. But the household has been running separately, which means nothing is being cross-referenced. You lose money that way. Victoria Hayes looked at her. It was the first moment in the conversation that Victoria was entirely unguarded, because it was the first moment that Clara had said something Victoria hadn't expected. You understand ranch accounts, Victoria said. I'm learning, Clara said. I understood business accounts before I came. The principles aren't that different. There was a brief silence. I suppose, Victoria said carefully, that it's useful to have someone who can manage things like that. She sat down across the table without being invited, noted, but did not comment on, though Ethan has always managed perfectly well on his own. He's a remarkable man, he is, Clara said. He's been through a great deal, Victoria said. Her voice had modulated into something softer, more confiding. Clara recognized as a specific technique the intimacy of shared concern offered by someone who was actually establishing territory. Losing Eleanor was devastating. He closed off completely for 2 years. All worried about him. She let that we sit there, doing its work. I suppose when he decided to, she paused. Well, when he made this arrangement, we were simply hoping it would give him some comfort. Some comfort. I heard everything in those 2 words, the calibration, The graceful diminishment, the very specific framing of Clara as a functional acquisition rather than a person Ethan had chosen. She set down her pen. She looked at Victoria Hayes directly. "How long have you been in love with him?" she asked. Went completely still. Victoria's expression didn't collapse. She was too practiced for that. But it rearranged itself very quickly through several things before settling on a careful blankness that was almost theatrical in its precision. "No, you don't have to answer," Clara said. "I'm not asking to be cruel. I'm asking because I think you deserve the space to be honest about it, at least with yourself." She picked up her pen again. "I'm not your enemy, Miss Hayes. I'm also not temporary. I want you to understand both of those things." Another silence. Longer this time. "You're very direct," Victoria Hayes said finally. "But I find that most problems get worse when you go around them," Clara said. Victoria looked at her for a long, measuring moment. Then she stood up, smoothed her coat, and said with a precision that suggested was choosing each word individually, "I hope you're as useful to him as you seem to think you are." "I hope so too," Clara said sincerely. Clara left without finishing her visit. Clara sat alone at the table for a moment after the sound of the carriage had faded. Her boners, and then she picked up her pen and went back to the ledger. But she had not won anything today. She knew that. Victoria Hayes was not the kind of problem that resolved itself in a single conversation, and was not the kind of audience that revised its opinions based on evidence alone. She had said the true thing, and she had not flinched. Thus she went back to the numbers, and the lamp burned. Outside, the Wyoming winter deepened around the house. Clara Whitmore, the forgotten daughter, the joke, the plain one, the other one sat at the table of a life that was slowly, remarkably beginning to fit her. The household accounts were only the beginning. What came next would test not just her courage, but the fragile, unspoken thing that was starting to grow between her and a man who had promised himself he was done with feeling anything at all. The morning after Victoria Hayes left, Ethan said nothing about the visit. Clara had not expected him to. She was already learning the particular grammar of this man's silences, the way he processed things inwardly before he would ever bring them outward, the way he held information, the way a good hand holds cards, not from deception, but from a deep-rooted habit of self-containment. She noticed at breakfast that he had poured her coffee before she sat down. He had not done that before. It was a small thing. Held it away without comment. Agnes noticed too. Clara caught the older woman watching from the kitchen doorway with an expression that was carefully arranged into blankness, which meant Clara had already learned that Agnes was thinking something she had decided not to say yet. Ranch had its own rhythms, and Clara had been studying them with the same quiet attention she had brought to Ethan's letter, household ledger, to Victoria Hayes's careful weaponized warmth. She watched the way the 14 ranch hands organized themselves in the morning, the informal hierarchy that existed outside of any official assignment, brothers named Holt and Carver, who seemed to set the tone for the whole crew. She watched the way supplies were requested and tracked, or more precisely, not tracked. She watched the way decisions that should have taken 5 minutes stretched to an hour because there was no clear process, and she could feel, in a way that was almost physical, the cumulative cost of that inefficiency over weeks and months and years. She was not trying to fix things yet. She was learning the shape of them first. The 4th day after Victoria's visit, something happened that accelerated everything. The elder of the two brothers, a large, weathered man of about 45, with a face like something carved from a practical material, came to the back door while Clara was reviewing the month's supply orders, which surprised her because the ranch hands generally treated the back entry as a functional passageway rather than a formal threshold. I'm at the door and found him standing there with his hat in his hands, which was even more surprising. "Ma'am," he said, "there's a problem with the winter feed order." "What kind of problem?" "Where we ordered for 200 head, and we're running closer to 260 now with the new Ethan cattle brought in from the garrison sale." He looked at his hat rather than at her. "I didn't want to bother Ethan with it," He's dealing with the fence situation on the north quarter. If we don't correct the order by Friday, the supplier closes out his stock and will be paying double come January. Clara looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Inside, show me the original order. He looked up. He had clearly expected her to tell him to wait for Ethan. Eyes on his face was unguarded in the way that honest people are sometimes unguarded when they haven't had time to rearrange their expression. He came inside. He showed her the order. She looked at the numbers, at the notes she had already made in her reorganization of the supply ledger, and she did the math, not the rough math, the real math, for the feed rate per head through a Wyoming winter. For hard weather, the cost difference between correcting the order now versus sourcing emergency feed in January. We need to increase by 40%, she said, not 30. If January runs hard, 30 won't hold. Holt looked at the numbers she had written. Quiet for a moment. That's yes, ma'am. That's right. I'll write the correction letter, she said. Can you get it to the supplier by Thursday? Yes. Good. She was already writing. And Holt, I'm going to need you to start giving me weekly supply status reports. Not formal. Just what's running low, what's running out, what you're concerned about. Can you do that? He was quiet again. The particular silence had a different quality than Ethan's silences. It was the silence of a man recalibrating. Ethan never asked for that, he said. I know, she said. The winter feed order was wrong. She handed him the corrected letter without looking up from the ledger. After a moment, she heard him fold it carefully and put it in his coat pocket. Then he said quietly, almost as an afterthought, Eleanor, Ethan's wife, she never came near the supply orders either. Clara set down her pen. Up at him. I'm not Eleanor, she said, unkindly, simply as a statement of fact, the way Ethan would have said it. Looked at her for a moment. Then he put his hat back on. No, ma'am, he said, you're not. And he went back outside. That evening, Ethan came in late from the north fence situation. The corners, which had been worse than expected, 3 posts down and a section of wire that had rusted through in a place no one had thought to check before the first snow. Tired in a way that showed in his shoulders and not in his face. Clara had also learned was specific to him. He held fatigue the same place he held everything else. Not in the expression. She had kept dinner warm. Her down and she put the plate in front of him and he said, told me about the feed order. I hope that was all right, she said. Down across from him. I didn't want to wait for you. The window was closing. It was all right, he said. For a moment. You added 40%. The original 30 was based on 200 head. Of 260 now. I know how many cattle I have, he said. His voice was not sharp, but it was precise, and she heard the precision. I know you do, she said. I wasn't suggesting otherwise. I was explaining my math. He looked at her across the table. The lamp between them made the shadows move slightly. 8%, he said. You added a buffer. If January runs hard, he won't hold. The buffer costs less now than emergency sourcing in January. He ate another bite. He was thinking she could see it, the way a thought moved through him, not on his face, but somewhere slightly behind it. Where did you learn to think like that? He said. There's business, she said. 7 years of watching what happened when people planned for the expected, and then the unexpected arrived. And what happened? They scrambled, she said. Scrambling is expensive. In money and in something harder to recover than money. He was quiet for a long moment. What's harder to recover than money? She looked at him. Trust, she said. When things go wrong because no one planned carefully enough, the people who depended on the plan stop trusting the person who made it. That's gone. She stopped. She had been thinking about her father, but she realized, as she said it, that it applied here too. To this ranch, to these 14 men who had been watching her for 3 weeks and deciding what to make of her. It takes a long time to rebuild. Ethan set down his fork. Lost a significant contract 2 years ago, he said, after Eleanor died. I wasn't paying attention the way I should have been. I'd worked with for years. A man I trusted structured his terms in a way that should have been caught immediately. I wasn't caught until it was too late. He picked up his fork again. Me 40 acres on the east boundary and 6 months of operating revenue. Clara was very still. This was the most personal thing he had said to her since she arrived. Sorry, she said. It was my fault, he said. I haven't been able to get past. It wasn't bad luck. It was inattention. I was grieving and I wasn't paying attention and I paid for it in a way that was entirely preventable. He ate for a moment, like things that are preventable. Neither do I, Clara said. They looked at her again. That looked the one she was starting to know. That was slightly more open than his usual expression, and that seemed to emerge only in this kitchen, at this hour, in this particular quality of lamplight. There, I know, he said. It sounded like something more than a response to what she had just said. It sounded like something he had been thinking for a while. She did not push it further. She cleared the plates and they sat together for another hour, him reviewing papers he'd brought in from the barn office, her continuing with the ledger, and they did not talk much more. The silence between them had changed again. It was warmer, not by much, but measurably. Outside, the first real snow of the season had begun to fall, pressing itself quietly against the windows of the house. Neither of them mentioned it because neither of them needed to. 3 days later, the letter from Missouri arrived. It was from Margaret. Clara recognized the handwriting on the envelope and felt a specific internal sensation that was not quite dread and not quite amusement, something that lived in the uncomfortable space between the two. It at the kitchen table, while Agnes was out doing the morning collection, and she read it alone. Margaret's letter was, in its own way, a masterpiece of its kind. It was written with complete surface warmth inquiries about Clara's health, the journey, about the ranch while managing, in nearly every sentence, to insert a small needle. Hope the ranch is comfortable. Though I imagine Wyoming winters must be terribly isolating for someone accustomed to company. And we've been telling people you've gone to help a family friend, as the actual situation is a bit delicate to explain socially. And near the end, Mother asks if you've had any indication of when you might be coming home. As naturally, we want to be prepared for whatever arrangement ends up being made. As though Clara were a misplaced piece of furniture that might need to be returned. She set the letter down. She looked at it for a moment. She picked it up and read it again, and this time she read it differently, not for what it was trying to do to her, for what it revealed about the person who wrote it. Margaret was afraid, not of Clara specifically, but of the possibility that Clara's life might actually be working. That the joke might have become something real, that the thing they sent her into as a humiliation might turn out to have been the best thing that ever happened to her. That particular fear, the fear of having accidentally done someone a good turn, was written in every careful line of that letter. Clara folded the letter and put it in her coat pocket. She would answer it. She would answer it with the same surface warmth and with complete honesty about how things were going. And she would do it without cruelty, because cruelty was Margaret's instrument and not hers. But she would also make sure that Margaret understood clearly that she was not coming home. She was already home. A realization struck her so cleanly and so suddenly that she went still at the kitchen table for a full minute, just sitting with it. She was home, not because the house was beautiful or the life was easy, was neither, but because for the first time in her memory, she was somewhere that asked something real of her and gave her something real in return. The ranch needed what she actually had, not a pretty face, a charming manner, not the ability to make a room feel her presence. It needed her mind and her steadiness and her willingness to pay attention to the things that other people were too proud or too distracted to notice. It needed her. Clara Whitmore, the one, forgotten one. She was needed. She got up and went back to the ledger. The second letter arrived 2 weeks later. This one was not from Margaret. This one was from Josephine, and where Margaret's letter had been a masterpiece of surface, warmth, and subsurface needles, Josephine's letter was simply honest in the way that younger siblings are sometimes honest carelessly, calculating the damage. Clara, mother is upset because Mrs. Lee asked about you at the society luncheon, and mother had to explain. and it was embarrassing for her. But you should know that people are talking. Thomas Whitfield's cousin apparently knows someone in Wyoming, and the story about how you came to be there as well. Mother says you should think about what this means for the family's reputation. I read this letter standing at the door, having just received it from the writer who brought mail out from town twice a week. Oh, she read it once, then she folded it and put it in the same pocket as Margaret's letter, and she walked back inside. Agnes was at the stove, at Clara's face and said, "Bad news, family." Clara said, "Read it adequately." Agnes made a sound that was eloquently non-committal. She handed Clara a cup of coffee. "How long have you worked for Ethan?" Clara asked. "Before Eleanor died," Agnes said. 2 years before, 2 years altogether. What was she like? Eleanor. Agnes was quiet for a moment, a particular quiet of someone who is deciding how much to give. "A good woman," she said finally. "Kind, gentle of this place, but I think it wore her down. To some people, the winters especially." She looked at the stove. She got sick the second winter. Nothing dramatic. Like something that has been in the cold too long and can't quite warm back up. And Ethan blamed himself, Agnes said. Even though there was nothing to blame, she got sick. People get sick, but he is the kind of man who believes that if he had paid closer attention, more careful, done something differently. She stopped. Or he's been paying for something he didn't do wrong ever since. Clara held her coffee cup outside through the kitchen window. She could see Ethan crossing the yard with Holt, of them looking at something in the middle distance with the focused attention of men cataloging a problem. "About the supply contract," Clara said. "And he lost after she died." Agnes looked at her sharply. "Told you about that?" "Yes," Clara said. "Why?" "Because," Agnes said slowly, "he has never told anyone about that. Not Holt, not the foreman, not anyone in town." She looked at Clara with that startled, celebrating expression, the same one Holt had worn, and Ethan himself sometimes wore. "He told you." Clara looked down at her coffee. She said, and then, before she could sit with that thought for too long, the door opened, and Ethan came in with Holt behind him. Both men had the particular expression of people who are carrying a problem and need to put it down somewhere. "Not a situation," Ethan said. He looked at Clara when he said it. At Agnes, at Clara. "Tell me," she said, "the situation was this. A man named Gerald Marsh, who owned a trading post 2 towns over and had a history of opportunistic land dealings throughout Sweetwater County, approached 2 of the smaller ranch owners in the area with a proposition. It was the positioning himself as a distribution middleman for the regional cattle market, offering guaranteed prices in exchange for exclusive supply contracts. On its face, it sounded beneficial. In practice, what it meant was that anyone who signed with Marsh effectively became dependent on his pricing. Such as pricing had a documented history of shifting in Marsh's favor once exclusivity was locked in. Owners said 2 of the smaller ranchers had already signed. Marsh had now approached Ethan. Representative, a smooth-talking man named Birch, had arrived in Millhaven the previous week, had left a formal proposal at the land office that morning. Ethan had retrieved it on his way back from the North Quarter. He spread the papers on the kitchen table. Clara looked at them. She read the proposal with the same attention she had brought to the household ledger, supply orders, the letters from Missouri. She read it once for the surface, and once for what was underneath the surface, and what was underneath the surface was exactly what she had expected. "Exclusivity clause," she said, "page 3, second paragraph. Plus guarantee is fixed for 18 months. After 18 months, it reverts to what they call a market-adjusted rate. But the adjustment mechanism is defined by Marsh's company, not by any external standard. So after 18 months, he sets the price and you have no recourse because you've already signed away your right to sell elsewhere." Ethan had been standing across the table at the page she was pointing to. Holt looked at it too. Holt said very quietly, "The other 2 ranchers signed this?" "I don't think they read this far," Clara said. A silence. "Can it be challenged?" Ethan said. "The contract itself is probably legal," she said. "But the situation it creates isn't inevitable. There are 2 options. She looked at him. "Sir, you can decline and make sure the other ranchers understand what they signed." Stopped. She was thinking, or Ethan said, or you could organize. She said, "The three of you, you and the two who signed, form your own collective. You pool your supply volume, which gives you negotiating power Marsh doesn't currently account for. To two or three competing buyers, show them the combined volume and create a bidding situation. Marsh's price guarantee starts to look a lot less attractive when there are three other buyers competing for the same cattle." The kitchen was very quiet. Ethan looked at her across the papers spread across the table. "You're describing a countermarket," he said. "I'm describing a fair one," she said. Holt made a sound that was definitively a laugh this time. Heard it quickly, but it had been there. Ethan did not laugh. Something shifted in his expression, something deep and slow. Movement in a very large thing that does not usually move. "I need to think about this," he said. "Of course," Clara said. She began neatly stacking the papers. "I'll write up the calculation, the combined volume, projected figures. It might help to have the numbers in front of you when you think." She said it simply, performance, the way she said most things. Ethan watched her stack the papers. "Clara," he said, looked up. "Thank you," he said. Just that, 2 words. The way he said them, with the same directness he had put into that first letter, the refusal to perform or inflate, made them mean more than most speeches she had heard. "Yes," she said. She went to find more paper. What she did not see, because her back was turned, that passed between Holt and Ethan. It was the kind of look that passes between two people who have known each other long enough to have an entire conversation without words. Holt's expression said, "She's something else, Ethan." Ethan's expression, the slight shift in the line of his jaw, the way he looked at the door she had passed through, said something back. Something he wasn't ready to say out loud yet. Something he had apparently been thinking for longer than he was prepared to admit. Night after the house had gone quiet and Agnes had retired and the ranch had settled into the deep silence of a Wyoming winter night, Clara was still at the kitchen table with her calculations when she heard Ethan's door open. Oh, he came in and stood in the kitchen doorway. "You should sleep," he said. "Soon," she said. He walked to the stove and poured himself a cup of the coffee she had left warming. He stood there for a moment, not sitting, not leaving. "My wife," he began. He stopped. "Eleanor was she made this house feel like a home. After she was gone, it stopped feeling like one. I told myself that was just what happens. It was the nature of grief, that it was supposed to feel like nothing." Clara had set down her pen. She was listening in the way she listened to things that mattered absolutely. Preparation, without planning her response. "But it's starting to feel like something again," Ethan said. He looked at his coffee cup. He did not look at her. "It's starting to feel like something." The silence that followed was the most complete silence Clara had ever sat inside. She did not fill it with something small or careful. Let it be what it was. "I'm glad," she said. Just that. He added. He nodded once. He went back to his room. Clara sat alone at the table for a long moment. Then she looked down at her calculations. Evans were completely steady. Her mind was clear. Outside, the snow was falling again, the way it seemed to always be falling in Wyoming. Endlessly patient, covering everything, making the world a little quieter and a little more honest than it had been before. Picked up her pen. She had work to do. And for the first time in 24 years, the work she had in front of her was exactly the work she had been made for. Calculations Clara had written that night were on Ethan's desk by morning. She had not made a production of leaving them there. She had simply set the papers in a neat stack beside his coffee cup before he came down, the way she did most things without announcement, waiting to be thanked. The numbers were clean and the logic was clear, and the rest was his decision to make. When he came down at 5:30, while the house was still dark, and Agnes wasn't yet in the kitchen, I heard him moving around. She was a light sleeper, always been, her body apparently having decided years ago that the world required monitoring, and she lay still in her room and listened to the particular silence of a man reading something that surprised him. She heard him set the papers down. She heard him pick them up again. Breakfast, he said. The projected volume, if we combine all three ranches, you included the Hayes spread. They're the largest in the county, Clara said. Victoria's father joins. The combined volume becomes significant enough that buyers will come to you instead of the other way around. Ethan looked at his coffee. Hayes and I have a complicated history. I know, Clara said. Told me. The boundary dispute 3 years ago. She paused. The boundary dispute was about land. This is about money and about Marsh, who'd be happy to pick off every rancher in Sweetwater County one by one if no one pushes back together. She met his eyes across the table. Sometimes the person you have a complicated history with is the exact person you need on your side. He was quiet for a long moment. You want me to go to James Hayes? He said. I think you should consider it, she said. Go with you if you want, or I'll stay here. Either way. He looked at her, then that look she had come to know, one that lived just behind his usual expression, that appeared when she had said something that's somewhere deeper than he had expected. Would you come with me? He said. Because James Hayes is a businessman, she said, and I'm organizing the numbers for 2 weeks. I know the argument better than anyone, right now. He considered this. Then he said, very simply, all right. They went to the Hayes Ranch the following afternoon. James Hayes was a large man in his late 60s, with the particular bearing of someone who had built something significant and was accustomed to being the most consequential person in any given room. He received them in his front office, not the parlor office, which Clara noted as a deliberate signal of how he was framing this meeting, and he looked at Ethan with the cautious respect of two people who have fought over something and arrived at an uneasy ceasefire. And then he looked at Clara. This is your stopped. He clearly didn't know what word to use. This is Clara, Ethan said. She's going to explain the numbers. James Hayes looked at Ethan for a moment. He looked back at Clara. Then he gestured at the chair across from his desk. There, he said. She sat down. She put the papers on his desk for 20 minutes, laying out the Marsh contract analysis, 9-volume calculation, the projected leverage with competing buyers, risk modeling for the two ranchers who had already signed, and what it would take to help them renegotiate from a stronger position. She spoke the way she had learned to speak in her father's office, plainly, precisely, without apology or excessive qualification, letting the numbers do the persuading that charm might have tried to do and done less efficiently. When she finished, James Hayes was quiet for almost a full minute. Then he said to Ethan, where did you find her? Missouri, Ethan said. Missouri? Hayes repeated. He looked at Clara again. I understand cattle ranch economics. I understand business economics, she said. The part I'm still learning. But the financial logic is the same. Hayes leaned back in his chair. Then he picked up the summary page. She had prepared the single-page version with the key figures. She had learned from watching her father that busy men will read one page where they will set aside 10. He read it again. Marsh approached me too, he said. I had not told them this. His voice had a careful quality of a man who has decided to be honest and is slightly surprised to find himself there. 2 weeks ago, his man Birch came by with the same proposal. He set the paper down. For him to come back in a month. He'll come back in 3 weeks, Clara said. Having a timeline. The two ranchers who signed gave him momentum, and he'll want to close the larger properties before the momentum stalls. Hayes looked at her sharply. Well, how do you know that? Because that's what I would do, she said. Or Marsh. The office went very still. Then James Hayes did something that Clara had not expected. He laughed, not a polite laugh, not a social laugh, a genuine laugh. Short and surprised and unguarded. He looked at Ethan and said, right, you know. She usually is, Ethan said. Something in his voice when he said it, some quiet note of certainty, made James Hayes look at him with an expression that was difficult to read and lasted only a second before Hayes looked back down at the papers. Only 3 days, Hayes said. I want my own man to look at the contract language before I commit to anything. He tapped the summary page. This logic is sound. If you're serious about forming the collective, I'm interested in the conversation. Ethan nodded. Clara picked up the papers he had been looking at all, except the summary page. which she left on his desk deliberately. Take the time you need, she said. I recommend not more than a week. Marsh's representative is already in town. Hayes looked at the summary page. Look, at Clara one more time, with an expression she recognized the expression of someone revising a conclusion they had formed too quickly. Then he said, I owe you an apology. She stopped. I heard things, he said, in town, about the circumstances of how you came to be at the Caldwell Ranch. He said this with the directness of someone who believes that a thing said plainly is less damaging than a thing left hanging. What I heard was not complimentary. I formed an opinion before I had any basis for it. He paused. I was wrong to do that. The room was quiet. Thank you for saying so, Clara said. And she meant it without any performance, not graciously, not pointedly, just genuinely. They drove back to the Caldwell Ranch in the late afternoon. For the first part of the journey, neither of them spoke. Cold came in off the land in steady waves, and Clara sat beside Ethan on the wagon seat with her hands in her coat pockets and her mind still running over the Hayes conversation, logging what had been said and what had been left out and what would need to happen next. You didn't have to say I was usually right, she said finally. I said usually, Ethan said. She looked at him. He was watching the road ahead with his usual expression. There was something at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. Almost one. That was generous, she said. It was accurate, he said. Then after a beat, you are. Usually. Right, she looked away. Old made her eyes water, which she was grateful for because it gave her somewhere convenient to attribute any expression she might be making that she didn't particularly want examined. Sure, she said. James Hayes said he heard things in town. How I came to be here. He was quiet for a moment. His hands on the reins did not change their grip. I know what they're saying, he said. There you. He thought about it. She could feel him thinking the particular quality of his attention when he was being honest, rather than reflexively diplomatic. It bothers me that they're saying things about you that aren't their business, he said. It doesn't bother me what the things are. He paused. I knew the circumstances when I wrote back to your letter. I've never had a moment's regret about writing back. The words landed quietly and completely, the way the most important things he said always landed, without decoration, performance, carrying all their weight in the simplest possible arrangement. Clara looked at her hands in her lap. My sisters sent my name and photograph as a joke, she said. Plus, she had not said this out loud to him before. They had never directly addressed it. You would reject me. They thought it would be humiliating. I know, he said. You knew? She looked at him. I suspected, he said, the way the letter was phrased. Certain inconsistencies. Your situation was described. He kept his eyes on the road. It didn't change anything. Whatever the reason the letter was sent, you were the one who wrote back. You were the one who came. He paused. Those were your choices, not theirs. Clara was quiet for a long time. How did you write back? She said. Honestly, when you saw the photograph, when you read the description, you must have had a moment where you questioned it. Now he was quiet for a long time. I wrote back, he said slowly, because your letter didn't try to convince me of anything. He shifted the reins in his hands. Every other response I received, and there were several after the advertisement ran, every one of them was trying to persuade me. Their qualities, their appearance, their suitability. They were selling something. He paused. Your letter wasn't selling anything. Here is who I am. Here is what I can offer. Here is what I would need in return. And if this doesn't suit you, understands completely. He looked at her then, briefly. We're looking back at the road. That is the rarest thing I have ever received in a letter, or anywhere else. Clara did not trust herself to speak for a moment. I almost didn't send it. I know, he said. Oh, because it was honest, he said. Honest letters are always the hardest to send. They reached the ranch as the last light was leaving the sky. Holt was waiting at the gate with a look on his face that meant something had happened. It was here, Holt said, the moment the wagon stopped. There's Marsh's man. He came by this afternoon wanting to speak with you directly. Ethan was down from the wagon before it had fully stopped moving. What did he say? He said the offer expires at the end of the month, Holt said. Had a revised proposal. Said the first one was preliminary. He looked at Clara as he said this. The new terms were considerably more attractive. Where is it? Clara said. He handed her the envelope. She opened it standing at the gate in the cold and read the revised proposal with the focused speed of someone who had been reading documents under pressure for years. The new terms were, on the surface, they're better a longer price guarantee window, a less punishing exclusivity clause, a sweetener in the form of an advance payment against next season's contract. He knows, she said. Knows what? Holt said. Looking to Hayes. She looked at Ethan. This revision is designed to make the original proposal look more reasonable in comparison. He's not genuinely improving the terms he's reinsuring. He wants us to feel like we got something when we didn't. Ethan took the papers from her. He read them. His jaw was tight in the way it got tight when he was angry and containing it. Not signing, he said. No, Clara agreed. We're not. I'll send Birch a message tomorrow, Ethan said. He handed the papers back to Clara. File. These with the others, she filed them. As she was walking back toward the house, she stopped. Out here. Something in the revised proposal was bothering her. A specific phrase in the new exclusivity clause, the wording around what constituted a breach. She had read it quickly in the cold, and she needed to read it again carefully. Something in it had snagged at the edge of her attention, like a thread catching on a nail. She sat down at the kitchen table and read it again. She read it 3 times. Then she put the paper down and sat very still. There it was. Buried in the new language, in the middle of the revised breach clause, a provision that if any rancher who had already signed with Marsh was found to be in communication with a competitive buying consortium, could accelerate payment of the full contract value immediately. In the future, immediately, which meant that if the 2 ranchers who had already signed agreed to participate in the collective and Marsh found out, and Marsh, who was running this operation methodically, would find out, he could effectively bankrupt them before the collective was even operational. Marsh wasn't just protecting his contract, he was building a trap. Routers, and he had delivered it to their door that afternoon. It meant he already knew what they were planning, which meant someone had told him. Clara stared at the paper. Her mind went back over the past week. Who knew about the collective proposal? Ethan, Holt, Agnes, who had overheard enough to understand the shape of it. James Hayes. She got up and found Ethan in the barn office. He looked up when she came in. She put the paper on his desk and pointed to the clause. His expression did not change on the surface. Underneath the surface, she could see something moving, the specific movement of a man who has just understood that the problem is larger and closer than he thought. He knew we were planning the collective, Clara said. Here today, before we went to Hayes, he already knew. Ethan looked up from the paper. Did you tell? No one, she said. You? No one outside this ranch, he said. His voice was very controlled. They looked at each other. Holt, Ethan said. Not an accusation, a thinking out loud. Has been with you for 9 years, Clara said. Curtis, Ethan said. Agnes has been with you for 7. Then who? He stopped. Clara looked at him steadily. Is there anyone else who has been in and out of this house in the past 2 weeks who would have had access to the papers on the kitchen table? A silence. And then Ethan's expression shifted in a way she had not seen before, a tightening around the eyes, a stillness in the jaw, the particular stillness of someone arriving at a conclusion they didn't want to arrive at. Clara came by, he said, 4 days ago, while I was out on the North Quarter. Clara remembered, but Agnes had mentioned it, a brief visit, 20 minutes, saying she had left something she had borrowed. Clara had been in her room with a headache that afternoon. She had heard voices and had not gone out. She was in the kitchen, Clara said. Agnes would have offered her coffee, Ethan said. Always does. The kitchen table. The papers were on the kitchen table, Clara said. Calculation, the collective proposal, everything. The barn was very quiet. Ethan stood up from his desk. He moved past Clara to the barn door and pushed it open and stood there with his hands on the doorframe and his back to her. And she could see the tension in his shoulders from where she stood. The way a man looks when something he trusted has been used against him. And he is containing the full force of that realization by sheer will. She said, I need a minute, he said. His voice was even. Urban. She gave him the minute. She stood in the barn and waited. But she did not speak and she did not move toward him. And she did not try to smooth it over, as she had learned. Was still learning that some things Ethan needed to carry to the edge of himself before he could set them down. After almost 2 full minutes, he turned around. I have known Victoria Hayes since we were young, he said. She was always, he stopped. He looked at the ceiling briefly, then back at Clara. She was at Eleanor's bedside when Eleanor died. Brought food to this ranch every week for the first 3 months after. Trusted her. I know, Clara said. She used that trust to help a man who wants to take everything I've built, he said. The anger in his voice was very quiet, which made it more present, or less. We don't know for certain, Clara said. Oh, we need to act as though we do. He looked at her. What do you mean? We need to move faster than we planned, she said. Collective, we need to finalize it before Marsh can use that clause. Which means we need Hayes's answer in 2 days, not a week. And we need to get to the other 2 ranchers, the ones who already signed, before Marsh decides to accelerate their contracts as a warning to us. If we approach them and Marsh finds out, he'll find out regardless, Clara said. He already has a source in your circle. The question now is whether we move before he does or wait for him to use what he knows. She paused. Depending on you being careful. He's on the normal pace of things. The assumption that you'll want more time, more confirmation, just certainty before you act. She looked at him steadily. I think we should surprise him. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. It was accelerate everything, he said. I want to make the move before he can set the trap, she said. He built the trap into the revised contract. We've seen the trap, which means we have one advantage. He doesn't know we've seen it. He looked at her. In that moment, in the cold of the barn, the weight of a betrayal he was still processing and a threat that was closer than he had realized. Ethan Caldwell looked at Clara Whitmore with something in his expression that she had not seen there before. Gratitude, though, that was in it. Not admiration, that was in it too. Something more essential than either of those things. Like of a person who in the middle of something genuinely hard, beside the and found someone there. All right, he said. I'm fast. Good, she said. I'll write to Hayes tonight. Sure. You ride to the Mercer Ranch. First thing tomorrow, they're one of the 2 who signed. Tell them everything yet. Just ask them to hold. Tell them you have information they need before they go any further with Marsh. And Birch? Let Birch wait, she said. A response to a trap is no response at all until you're ready. He nodded once. He picked up his coat. Then he stopped. He turned back to her. Clara, he said. She looked at him. When this is over, he stopped. Do it again. When this is settled, I'd like to talk about making this arrangement more permanent. He said it the same way he said everything that mattered, plainly, without decoration, without any safety net of ambiguity. So, we agreed to find our footing first. I know it's only been yes, Clara said. First. He stopped. I haven't finished. I know what you're asking, she said. The answer is yes. He looked at her for a long moment. Through his expression, something too quiet and too deep to name precisely. Real in the way that only very few things are completely real. Right, he said. His voice was different, not softer exactly. Claire? All right, she said. He went to write the message for Holt to carry to the Mercer Ranch at first light. Claire went back to the kitchen table. She picked up her pen. Outside, the wind had come up the way it did on the nights when tomorrow was going to be harder than today, pressing against the walls of the house, testing the seams. She wrote the letter to James Hayes. She wrote it cleanly and quickly, because there was no time for anything else. And when she was done, she sealed it and left it with the others to go out in the morning. And then she sat alone at the table for just one moment, one single private moment, and she pressed her hand flat against the wood of the table and breathed. About Margaret's letter, she thought about the dining room in Missouri, where she had set the letter down beside her plate and said, when? She thought about the train and the enormous honest sky, old platform at Rock Springs, where a man had walked toward her and not looked away. They sent me here as a joke. She thought, I'm so grateful. Then she picked up her pen again and got back to work. Because the morning was going to arrive whether she was ready or not. Clara Whitmore had never once in her life let the morning find her unprepared. Ethan rode out to the Mercer Ranch before dawn. Clara heard him go, the particular sounds of a man moving through a house in the dark, with deliberate, quiet, full closing of doors, the creak of the front step that she had been meaning to mention to someone since her second week at the ranch. She lay still and listened until the sound of the horse faded out toward the road. And then she got up. She was dressed and at the kitchen table with the lamp lit and the household files open in front of her. By the time Agnes came down an hour later, Agnes took one look at her and went directly to the stove without a word. That was one of the things Clara had come to value most about Agnes, the woman's absolute refusal to perform surprise at anything. To the Mercer place, Agnes said. Not a question, Clara said. Before Birch has a chance to make his morning rounds, Agnes put the coffee on. You think Marsh moves that fast? I think Marsh has already been moving, Clara said. We're catching up. Agnes was quiet for a moment. Victoria came by again yesterday. While you were right, I didn't want to interrupt you. Clara looked up. What did she want? Said she was checking on Ethan. Agnes said, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of a woman who had formed a clear opinion and was choosing her words with precision. How things were going, which she called it, the business situation. I didn't know the details. Good, Clara said. I know the details, Agnes said. I know you do, Clara said. Sure. Thank you, Agnes. The older woman took 2 cups to the table and sat down across from her, something she had never done before in all the weeks Clara had been at the ranch. Put the cups down, and she looked at Clara with the directness that Clara had come to understand was Agnes's version of affection. What you're doing, don't you? Agnes said. It wasn't a question either. With the business situation? Clara said. All of it, Agnes said. Clara looked at her coffee. I know what I'm doing today, she said. That's generally as far ahead as I let myself plan. Agnes made that sound the one that wasn't quite a laugh. Claire, that's smart, she said. That's smarter than most people manage. She picked up her cup. Eleanor used to plan 3 years ahead. Every detail. Books full of plans. She paused. When she got sick, books were the hardest thing. All that planning, she stopped. She looked at the table. Ethan kept them. Always thought he kept them because throwing them away would have meant admitting that plans don't hold. Plans don't hold, Clara said gently. The person doing the planning can. Agnes looked at her. Her expression was unguarded, in a way Clara had only seen a few times, the expression of someone who has been struck by something simple and true and wasn't prepared for it. Yes, Agnes said. That's right. She straightened. I'll make breakfast. Clara went back to the files. Colorado's. Ethan returned from the Mercer Ranch at mid-morning. Colorado's. And from the way he came through the door, not urgently, but with a specific quality of focused momentum, the walk of a man who has received news and is already processing what to do with it. Clara knew before he spoke that something had shifted. Mercer signed under pressure, Ethan said. He sat down at the table. He had not even taken off his coat. Birch came to him 3 weeks ago with a deadline. He needed the advance payment. He had a bad season from losses from a late frost. He signed before he read it carefully. He paused. He's been sick about it since. Does he understand the acceleration clause? He does now, Ethan said. I showed him the revised proposal, the one Birch left here. Showed him the breach provision. His jaw was tight, but he went pale. What did he say? He said he'd do whatever was necessary to get out of it. Ethan looked at her. Can he, legally? If we can establish that the contract was presented under false pretenses, if we can show that Marsh deliberately concealed the implications of the breach clause, there might be grounds to challenge it. She had been thinking about this since 3 a.m. We need someone who knows contract law. Is there a lawyer in Millhaven? Not one I'd trust with this, Ethan said. There's a man in Rock Springs, Nathaniel Greer. He handled the land office issues after Eleanor died. He's sharp, and he doesn't owe anyone in this county a favor. Can you get him here by the end of the week? I can send a rider today. Send the rider, Clara said. Already standing. What else? She handed him a letter. Hayes. Today, if possible. It explains the acceleration clause and why we need his answer in 48 hours, a week. He took it. He read it quickly, scanning the way he read things when he trusted the source and was looking for anything that needed adjustment rather than reading for comprehension. It. It's good, he said. I'll send Carver with it. He went to find Carver. Clara sat at the table and thought about what came next. The legal challenge to Mercer's contract, if it was possible, would take time they might not have if Marsh decided to accelerate. The collective needed Hayes's formal agreement before it could approach outside buyers, because without the Hayes volume, the numbers weren't compelling enough to bring multiple buyers to the table. And underneath all of this, running like a current beneath everything else, was the question of Victoria Hayes, what she had seen on the kitchen table, what she had told Marsh's man, and what it meant that Ethan had trusted her for years, and she had used that trust the way she had. Clara had not told Ethan that she intended to speak to Victoria directly. She was not certain she should, but she was certain that the situation couldn't be left unaddressed, not because of what it meant for the business negotiations, because Ethan deserved to know the truth about someone he had called a friend, and the truth deserved to be confirmed before it became an accusation. She had seen enough damage done by accusations made on incomplete information to know that certainty mattered here. She needed to see Victoria Hayes face to face. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. Victoria arrived at the ranch that same afternoon, just after the lunch hour, in her good carriage with her good driver, a coat that Clara had come to recognize as her visiting coat, the statement coat that said, "I have not come to you casually. I am aware that I am worth looking at." She came to the front door this time, rather than the back. There was also a statement. Clara answered the door herself. Agnes had seen the carriage coming and had appeared at Clara's shoulder with an expression that asked a silent question. Clara had shaken her head slightly. She would handle this, and Agnes had retreated to the kitchen with the careful movement of someone choosing not to be far away. Victoria looked at Clara. Her expression was composed, always beautiful and composed and controlled in the way of a woman who has been performing confidence for so long it has become indistinguishable from the real thing. "Ethan here," she said. "He's out," Clara said. This was true. Ethan had ridden out to check the north fence line after sending the riders, turning off the kind of anger that needed movement and cold air rather than conversation. To come in? A flicker of something across Victoria's face. She had expected to be turned away, Clara realized, or to speak to Ethan directly, or both. She had not expected to be invited in by Clara. Clara said, "Thank you." They sat in the front parlor, not the kitchen, not the working table. The parlor, which was the room for formal things. Clara poured tea because it was the thing to do, and because having something to do with their hands would make what came next slightly easier for both of them. They sat with the tea and the silence and the comfortable furniture of a conversation that hadn't started yet. Clara said, "I know you spoke to Birch." Victoria went very still, dramatically still. She did not put down her cup sharply or make a sharp sound or do any of the things that a person in a story might do at that moment. She simply became still in the way of someone whose body has understood the situation before their mind has caught up with it. "Oh, she began. "You saw the papers on the kitchen table," Clara said. Her voice was completely even. "When you came by 4 days ago to return the borrowed item, Agnes made coffee. The papers were there. You read enough to understand what was being planned. Sometime in the 2 days after that, you communicated it to Birch." She paused, asking whether you did it. "I'm telling you what I know, and I'm asking you why." The room was quiet. Victoria set her cup down. Carefully, she looked at her hands for a moment, and in that moment, her face did something it almost never did. In Clara's presence, it let go of its performance. Briefly, just enough. "Ethan was going to get hurt," Victoria said. Her voice was different, lower, real in a way it rarely was. "Marsh is connected to people in Cheyenne, people with serious influence. If Ethan moved against him without enough backing, understanding the full scope of what Marsh operates." She stopped. "I was trying to warn him. Through Birch." By telling Birch what Ethan was planning, Clara said. By sending a message that Ethan should stand down, Victoria said. The active idea was too risky given who Marsh actually answers to. And you thought delivering that message through Marsh's own representative was the best approach, Clara said. It was not sarcasm. She genuinely wanted to follow Victoria's logic. Victoria stopped again. She pressed her lips together. If Marsh knew that Ethan was aware of his operation, Marsh might decide Ethan wasn't worth the trouble, or that he'd move on to easier targets. She looked up. I was not trying to help Marsh. I was trying to protect Ethan. Clara looked at her. Flint stretched. Do you believe that? Clara said. What you just told me. Do you genuinely believe it? Victoria's chin came up slightly. Yes. Then let me ask you something honestly, Clara said. All the years you've known Ethan Caldwell, have you ever known him to be protected by someone making decisions for him without his knowledge? The question landed. His expression shifted again. Something moving beneath the surface, complicated and old. No, she said quietly. He's been carrying this ranch and everything on it since Eleanor died, Clara said. He carried the loss of the contract. He carried the boundary dispute. He carried 2 of the worst winters in a decade. He did not need protection then. He does not need it now. She paused. What he needed, what he asked for, the most direct and honest way I've ever seen anyone ask for anything, was a partner who would stand beside him, in front of him. Victoria looked at her for a long time. Victoria said. It was not an accusation. Observation said with the particular quality of someone who has just fully understood something they have been half understanding for a long time. Claire did not answer immediately. That is between Ethan and me, she said. What's between you and me is this conversation, and what I need from you is a decision. What decision? Whether you're going to help us, Clara said, or whether you're going to step back and let this play out. Victoria blinked. My help. Your father is the largest rancher in Sweetwater County, Clara said. I already asked him to consider joining the collective. He's interested. If you go to him today, not next week, and tell him what you know about Marsh's connections in Cheyenne, it strengthens the argument for moving quickly. It adds information we don't have. She met Victoria's eyes. You said you communicated with Birch because you were concerned about Ethan. If that's true, then prove it by actually helping him, not by going around him. Another silence. This one was different from all the silences that had come before it. This was the silence of a person making a real decision rather than performing the motion of one. What happened, Victoria said slowly, is that I have been in love with Ethan Caldwell for 9 years. She said it with a kind of tired steadiness, the way you say a thing when you have finally decided that carrying it alone is no longer worth the energy. I told myself, every time he seemed to be managing on his own, I was being a good friend by not pushing. And when he sent for you, she stopped. I told myself the things I told myself, that you wouldn't suit him, that it would fall apart. She looked at Clara directly. And then you arrived, and you were nothing like what I had prepared for. What had you prepared for? Clara said. Something I could dismiss, Victoria said simply. The honesty of it was so complete that Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not sympathy exactly. Something closer to recognition, the recognition of one woman for another, who has been in a long, private war with herself and is speaking about it for the first time. Sorry, Clara said, and she meant it. Don't be, Victoria said. Upped up her tea, she drank it. She set it down. Tell me what you need me to say to my father, Clara told her. Victoria left within the hour. She left differently than she had arrived, without the performance, the carriage posture that announced itself. She looked, Clara thought, like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just been given permission to set part of it down. Agnes appeared in the parlor doorway the moment the carriage was out of sight. It went better than I expected, Agnes said. It went honestly, Clara said. Which is better than better. Ethan came in from the north fence 2 hours later, old and tired and carrying the particular weight of a man who has been working his body hard in order to give his mind space to work through something. Stopped when he saw Clara's expression. What happened? He said. Everything. She told him about Victoria's visit, what Victoria had said, and what she had asked Victoria going to James Hayes to share what she knew about Marcia's Cheyenne connections. Told him all of it plainly, the way he had always told her things without softening the edges, making it easier than it was. Ethan sat down, very still for a long time. She thought she was protecting me, he said finally. Hers was flat in the way that things are flat when they are covering a lot of depth. She believed she was, Clara said. I think the truth is more complicated than that. I think the belief is genuine. He looked at the table. There, she's been my friend since we were young, he said. Since before Eleanor. Since he stopped. He pressed his hand flat against the table, the same unconscious gesture Clara herself had made the night before. There, she realized. The gesture of needing to feel something solid. Have come to me. Yes, Clara said. She should have. Why didn't she? Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said gently, because she didn't trust that coming to you honestly would get her the outcome she wanted. And that's a conversation you'll need to have with her, not now, while all of this is happening, but eventually. He looked up at her, angry with her. I was, Clara said, for about 20 minutes. And then I listened to her, and I understood what had actually happened, which is more useful than being angry. He studied her face for a moment. How do you do that? He said. Do what? Stay that clear, he said. When there's reason not to be. She thought about it honestly. I spent a long time in a house where being angry never changed anything, she said. I learned to save it for things that actually required it. She paused. I don't require it. We have what we need from Victoria. The anger would just be in the way. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, the writer came back from Rock Springs. Greer can be here Thursday. Good, she said. When Hayes sends his answer, Greer, to look at all 3 contracts simultaneously. If we can find grounds to challenge Mercer's, we might be able to use the same argument for the second rancher who signed. Holt knows the second rancher, Ethan said. Oh, they've worked together before. Holt could go to him. Tomorrow? Tomorrow. They worked until late that night, not the comfortable working beside each. Other of previous evenings, the focused, fast-paced working of 2 people who understood that the window they were operating in was narrowing. They organized the documentation. Ethan drafted correspondence. Between them across the kitchen table, they built the architecture of something that had not existed 3 weeks ago, a counter-strategy that was matching Marcia's complexity with its own. At one point, Ethan reached across the table for a paper that was on Clara's side, and their hands came within an inch of each other, but neither of them moved away, and neither of them acknowledged it. No more dumbers. The moment passed, but the warmth of it didn't. 7 o'clock, Ethan said, Clara. She looked up. I'm going to say something, and I want you to let me finish it this time, he said. Put down her pen. When I wrote that letter, he said, the first one I was writing out of practicality. Honest about what I needed, because I decided honesty was more efficient than pretense. I wasn't expecting. He stopped. He started again. I wasn't expecting to find someone I actually wanted to talk to. Someone whose mind He stopped again. Ethan, she said quietly. I'm finishing, he said. She closed her mouth. I told you I wanted to make this arrangement more permanent, he said. I meant that, but I want you to know it's not about the ranch. About the ledgers or the supply orders or the fact that you might have just saved everything I've spent 15 years building. He looked at her directly, routers, the way he always looked at things he was certain about. When I come in from the north fence at the end of a hard day, the thing I've been looking forward to since your 3rd day at this ranch is whatever you're going to say next. The kitchen was completely quiet. Clara looked at him. She thought about the letter she had received from Margaret, and that had started everything. She thought about the joke and the photograph and the cruel, cheerful handwriting, about sitting on the train and reading his 3 paragraphs and feeling, the first time in years, like she was reading something real. I came here, she said slowly, because your letter was the first thing anyone had ever offered me that didn't require me to be different than I am. She paused. I stayed because... She looked at her hands. I stayed because this place and the work, and you asked something real of me. I've never had that before. Not from a place, not from a person. She looked up. I'd like to stay. Not as an arrangement, as a choice. He reached across the table, his hand over hers. Not a large gesture, not a romantic flourish. Just his hand on hers, warm and certain. The way he did everything that mattered. Then stay, he said. Yes, she said. They sat like that for a moment, two people at a kitchen table in Wyoming, with ledgers and contracts between them and a hard week ahead, and the Wyoming wind against the walls. And it was nothing like the romantic stories Clara had grown up reading, and everything like what she had actually needed without knowing how to name it. Ethan said, the Greer letter, did you seal it? Or should I add the land office detail before you do? I left space at the bottom, she said. And then seal it. He added it. She sealed it. They went back to work. James Hayes's answer came the following morning. His rider arrived at first light. Before either of them had finished their coffee, the letter was brief and definitive in the way of a man who makes up his mind slowly and then commits completely. Caldwell, I'm in. Victoria told me about the Cheyenne connection. We need to move on this Hayes ranch tomorrow morning with Miss Whitmore. Bring the full documentation. James Hayes. Ethan read it and handed it to Clara without comment. She read it. She looked at the name at the bottom of the letter. Miss Whitmore. He had not written your companion or the woman or any of the vague designations that people in Millhaven had been using. He had written her name. He wrote my name. Ethan said. Thursday is Greer, she said. They're down. Wednesday is Hayes. Tomorrow we need Holt to go to Farlow, which means today we prepare everything Greer will need, Ethan said. I'll start with the Marsh contract analysis, she said. Pull the title records and the original supply agreements, he said. Agnes set a plate of biscuits between them on the table, looked at both of them, said nothing, and went back to the stove. Outside, Millhaven was waking up, and Gerald Marsh's man Birch was somewhere in it, still waiting for a response that was not going to come, operating on a timeline that Clara had already disrupted, holding a trap that had been seen and stepped around. Caldwell Ranch. And in the kitchen of the Caldwell Ranch, with coffee going cold and paper spreading across the table, and two people working with the focused alignment of people who have found their stride together, something was happening that no one in Millhaven, and certainly no one in Missouri, had seen coming. Clara Whitmore, the forgotten daughter, the joke, ugly mail-order bride, the one they had sent to the Wyoming Territory to be humiliated, had become the center of gravity of something, not because she had forced it or performed it or campaigned for it, because she had simply shown up and paid attention to the work and been exactly who she was from the first moment to this one. And the people who had expected her to fail, the ones who were somewhere in Missouri waiting for the story of her embarrassing return, were going to have to wait a very long time. Because Clara Whitmore was not going anywhere. She had already written back. Nathaniel Greer arrived on Thursday morning, exactly when he said he would, which told Clara something important about him before he opened his mouth. A compact man in his mid-50s with the kind of face that had been weathered into useful angles by years of doing difficult work without flinching from it, like a leather case that was visibly old and visibly well-maintained, which told her something else, that he was the kind of man who took care of the tools of his profession. He shook Ethan's hand at the door, and then he shook Clara's hand. Every man in Wyoming Territory did automatically. And he looked at her with the direct, assessing attention of a professional who is deciding in the first 30 seconds how much he can trust the people he's about to work with. You're the one who found the acceleration clause, he said to Clara. Also not a question. Yes, she said. Show me, he said. She showed him. She laid out the documents in the order she had organized them: original Marsh proposal, Mercer's signed contract, the side-by-side analysis she had written, comparing the language in all three. And she walked him through her reasoning at the pace he set, which was faster than she expected and exactly as fast as she could go without losing precision. He did not interrupt. He did not ask clarifying questions until she had finished. When she was done, he was quiet for almost a full minute, reading back through the analysis with his pen moving in the margin. Colorado, Then he said the acceleration clause is the mechanism. It's not the vulnerability. Clara looked at him. Vulnerability. The disclosure requirement, he said. Turned to page 4 of Mercer's contract and pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. Under Wyoming Territory Commercial Law, a contract that contains a punitive acceleration mechanism of this magnitude is required to have the mechanism explicitly disclosed to the signing party in plain language before execution. Be buried in a subordinate clause. He looked up. This was not disclosed. I'd stake my practice on it. The kitchen went very still. Ethan, who had been standing at the edge of the table, was closer. That voids the contract, he said. It creates grounds for a challenge that Marsh would have difficulty winning in front of a fair judge, Greer said. The term, which is not quite the same thing, but in practical terms. He closed the contract. Marsh knows this. He has to know this. Which means this revised proposal, he tapped the second document. And this isn't a genuine renegotiation. It's a preemptive cover. I get Ethan to sign a second document that does have the disclosure in proper form, because once that signature is on paper, the argument about the first contracts becomes considerably harder to make. He looked at Clara. He needed a new signature, preferably from the largest ranch in the county. So the revised proposal delivered to us by Birch, Clara said. Here was Marsh, trying to protect himself from his own faulty contracts by getting a clean one from Ethan, Greer said. Yes, Ethan said, very quietly. He was never interested in our cattle. He was interested in your signature, Greer said. Well, name on a contract gives legitimacy to his entire operation in this county. Every smaller rancher who signed would have had less grounds to challenge, because if Ethan Caldwell signed, the terms must be reasonable. The logic. He set the pen down, but he overreached. The acceleration clause in the original contracts is his exposure that it's been identified. He looked at Clara again. That measuring expression. How quickly can you get me in front of the ranchers who signed? Holt rode to Farlow yesterday, Ethan said. Mercer is already willing, was cautious. Farlow owes Marsh money from a separate transaction, Clara said. Men looked at her. I found it in the county records when I was pulling the land office documents. Private loan, 18 months ago, secured against a portion of Farlow's grazing rights. Which means if Farlow challenges the Marsh contract, the loan. She paused. Farlow isn't cautious. Farlow is afraid. Greer looked at her for a long moment. It'll be refinanced, he said. Through a private arrangement. It could be, Ethan said slowly. He was looking at Clara too. If someone were willing to take on the note. If the collective is forming anyway, Clara said, Farlow's participation matters to the combined volume. And it does. Herd is significant, then the collective absorbing the loan as part of Farlow's entry terms is not charity. It's a business investment. She looked at Ethan. The interest rate Marsh is charging is punitive. We refinance at a fair rate. Farlow participates in the collective. Combined volume goes up. The loan repays itself in the first good season. Greer made a sound that was unmistakably appreciative. You should have been a lawyer, he said. I had a good father who made a lot of avoidable mistakes, Clara said. It was educational. Ethan almost smiled. She saw that almost smile she had been cataloging since her first week at the ranch, the one that lived at the corner of his mouth and lasted about 2 seconds before he contained it. I tried to Farlow myself, Ethan said. Today. Take the loan figures, Clara said. Already calculated the refinancing terms. He looked at her. Of course you have, he said. She handed him the paper. He left within the hour. Greer stayed at the kitchen table with the documents, skimming through the contract language with the focused intensity of a man who has found the crack in a wall and is determining exactly how much pressure it will take to open it. Clara worked beside him, pulling records when he asked for them, answering questions when he had them, and twice catching errors in his own drafting that he acknowledged with a brief nod and corrected without comment, which she took as the highest compliment a man like Greer was likely to offer. Agnes moved around them with coffee and food, the steady, quiet backdrop of someone who understands that important work is happening and that the most useful thing she can do is keep the people doing it fed and caffeinated. 2 in the afternoon, a rider came from the Hayes Ranch. A letter this time. James Hayes himself was requesting that Ethan and Clara come to the Hayes Ranch the following morning, not for the meeting they had already scheduled. In addition to it, something had come up. The writer would not say what. I looked at the message. Did Victoria say something to her father? Agnes said, Clara's shoulder. She said she would, Clara said. Well, but this feels like more than that. She handed the message to Greer. He read it and handed it back without comment, but his eyes had sharpened. Marsh has Cheyenne connections, he said. Hayes knows something about those connections specifically. He looked at Clara. What he knows is what I think it might be. This situation is larger than a county-level contract dispute. How much larger? Clara said. Larger than anything you can handle without allies in Cheyenne, he said. They're very bad news, or he paused. Or it's the thing that ends this decisively instead of slowly. Clara looked at him. Tell me what you know, she said. He told her. What Greer knew, or rather, they had long suspected, based on 2 previous cases he had seen in the Northern Territories involving in similar contract structures, was that Marsh was not an independent operator. The distribution middleman approach, the punitive acceleration clauses, the strategic targeting of ranchers with existing financial vulnerabilities, Cheyenne connections, these were the signature of a land acquisition operation that moved through commercial contracts rather than direct purchase. You didn't buy the land. You contracted the cattle operation. Contract, unsustainable, triggered the acceleration clause, eased in, and then bought the land at distressed prices from ranchers who had been bankrupted by the clause they hadn't understood they'd signed. Well, it had happened in 2 other counties. Both times, the ranchers who had fought back hardest had done so too slowly, isolation, without understanding the full scope of what they were up against. Times, Marsh, or the organization Marsh operated for, had won. Sarah sat very still while Greer explained this. She thought about Mercer, who had gone pale when he understood the acceleration clause, about Farlow and his punitive loan. She thought about the 2 hard winters Ethan had described, loss of the 40 acres and 6 months of operating revenue, the grief-fogged season when he had not been paying attention, about how precisely this operation had been concalibrated not to defeat strong men, to find the moments when strong men were already bent and push them the rest of the way down. At Ethan specifically, she said. After Eleanor died. That would be consistent, Greer said. I've been waiting 4 years, she said. Since the contract loss, that's when Ethan first became vulnerable in a way that showed up in the county records. Marsh is patient, Greer said. Of operation is always patient. Clara looked at the papers spread across the table. Players. Someone had been watching this ranch, watching this man, waiting for the right combination of circumstances and pressure points, had finally decided that now this season, this winter was the moment. If she had not come, if the letter had never been sent, or had been sent and ignored, or if she had done what Margaret expected and stayed in Missouri, had not knocked on the back door about the winter feed order, if she had not read the revised Marsh proposal carefully enough to catch the acceleration clause. She did not believe in accidents. She believed in the accumulation of small choices that look at a distance like fate. What do we need from Hayes? She said. Correct. Names, Greer said. The specific names of the Cheyenne principals Marsh answers to. If Hayes has those, I have contacts in Cheyenne who have been building a case on a related matter for 18 months. Happening in Sweetwater County might be exactly the evidence they need to move from building a case to filing one. Clara stood up. I'll send a message to Hayes tonight explaining what we need and why, she said. That tomorrow morning is not the first time he's hearing it. She was already moving toward the writing desk. Oh, and I need you to write to your Cheyenne contacts tonight as well. This moves as fast as I think it needs to. We can't afford a single day of lag. Greer looked at her. You're running this operation, he said. It was not a complaint. It was an observation, said with the same directness he applied to everything. One has to, she said. He picked up his pen. Ethan came back from the Farlow Ranch as the last daylight was leaving. In the way he came through the door, something lighter in his stride than when he had left. Something that had been resolved Clara knew before he spoke. Hello is in, he said. Agnes stopped moving at the stove. He agreed to the loan refinancing? Clara said. He did. Ethan sat down and pulled off his coat. Tired. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way she always saw it, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from spending effort on something that mattered. Right, he said, Farlow, when I laid out the terms. He said it straightforwardly, without mockery. He's been carrying that loan for 18 months, thinking there was no way out of it. And he apologized for crying, and I told him he had nothing to apologize for. How old is Farlow? Clara asked. 62, Ethan said. He built his spread from nothing. 40 years of work. He looked at the table. Hirsch found him during a bad season and lent him money with a smile and a handshake and terms written in language. A 62-year-old rancher who had spent 40 years with cattle and not contracts was not up to fully understand. His voice was very quiet. Is not the behavior of a businessman. That is the behavior of a predator. I know, Clara said. And what Greer had explained, the full scope of the operation, on connection, the pattern across other counties. Clee then listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. He's been planning this since Eleanor died, he said. Since the contract loss made the vulnerability visible in the records, she said. Another silence. Then he used her death, Ethan said. Then quietly, he looked at what happened to me and he saw an opportunity. Yes, Clara said. She did not soften it. She had learned in these weeks that he did not want softening. He wanted the truth in its actual shape, even when the shape was painful, because a man who held things precisely could deal with them precisely. Start with it for a moment. Then he looked up. What do we need from Hayes tomorrow? She told him. He nodded. I'll let you lead the conversation, he said. Looked at him. This is your ranch. It's ours, he said. Simply, without drama. And you know the Yemen better than I do right now. Lead it. In the morning, they went to the Hayes ranch together. James Hayes was already in his office when they arrived, and he was not alone. Victoria was there, sitting in the chair nearest the window, and she looked at Clara when she came in with an expression that was quieter than any she had worn before, stripped of its usual careful composition, worn in a way that Clara recognized as the particular look of someone who has spent a sleepless night with a difficult truth. Clara said as she sat down. Clara, Victoria said. Just the name. But the way she said it without the careful distance, the performance was its own kind of statement. James Hayes waited until everyone was seated. Then he put a piece of paper on his desk, not one of their documents, of his own, and he said, I know who Marsh answers to. The room went very still. The primary principal in Cheyenne is a man named Aldous Crane, Hayes said. Crane operates through 4 or 5 companies, all of which look legitimate on paper. He has connections to 2 of the territorial land commissioners, which is why these operations have been able to proceed without intervention. He looked at Ethan. I have known this for 2 years. I have said nothing because I had no evidence that could be used. Knowledge of the shape of things. He paused. Claire told me last night about the lawyer, about Greer. The case being built in Cheyenne. Greer sent a message to his contacts last night, Clara said. Information about Crane can be put in a formal statement. I'll make a formal statement, Hayes said. Sure. If Greer needs it today. Ethan looked at the older man across the desk. I know, he said. You said you've known for 2 years. Hayes was quiet for a moment. He glanced at Victoria, and something passed between them, a father and daughter communication, and wordless. The kind built over decades. Then he looked back at Ethan. 2 years ago, Hayes said, I did not have reason to believe that anyone in this county had both the intelligence and the courage to make a fight of this. He paused. I do now. And he looked briefly but unmistakably. Clara felt something shift in the room and Ethan beside her. Between all of them. Not a dramatic shift. Quieter and more permanent. The shift of a situation that has found its foundation. Let me send for Greer, she said. He needs to be here for your statement. Send for him, Hayes said. She sent for him. Greer arrived within 2 hours, across from James Hayes, and he took the statement with the focused precision of a man who understood that that what he was hearing was exactly the piece that had been missing from 18 months of careful work. He asked his questions specific, surgical, without redundancy, and Hayes answered them with the calm authority of a man who had been waiting for the right moment to use what he knew and had finally found it. Arya sat through all of it without speaking. Once, Hayes was describing the timeline of Crane's operations in the Northern Territories. She looked at Clara across the room, and what passed by between them was not precisely friendship. It was too new and too complicated for that word, but it was something real. Acknowledgement of two women who had been, for a time, in each other's way and had found a different arrangement. When Greer had everything he needed, he packed his case with the efficient movements of a man preparing to move quickly. "I'll have this to Cheyenne within the week," he said. "Hayes has given me, and what you've documented on the contracts, I believe we have enough." He looked at Clara. "The disclosure violation alone is grounds to void both of Mercer's and Farlow's contracts. The Cheyenne information elevates this to a territorial matter, which takes it out of Marsh's local influence." He paused. "This is going to happen fast once it starts. Are you prepared for that?" "We've been preparing," Clara said. "Oh." He nodded. He shook Ethan's hand. He shook Clara's hand again. He looked at her once more with that measuring expression and said, "The ranch is in good hands, Mr. Caldwell." He left. In the weeks that followed, and they were fast weeks, exactly as Greer had promised, the Sweetwater County Ranchers Collective formally came into existence. Paperwork was filed at the land office on a cold December morning, with Ethan's name at the top as founding member and the names of Hayes, Mercer, and Farlow beneath it. Clara had drafted the organizational charter. She had also, at Hayes's insistence, been listed as the collective's administrative officer, the person responsible for the supply coordination, financial reporting, and the communication with buyers. She had looked at her name on that document for a long moment before she signed it. Clara Whitmore, Administrative Officer, Sweetwater County Ranchers Collective. Clara Whitmore, the forgotten daughter. Not Clara Whitmore the joke, the plain one, the other one, the ordinary one, nobody expected anything from. Her name. Doing the work she was built to do. The Cheyenne case moved with the speed of something that has been building pressure for a long time and finally finds its release. Players' contacts, armed with Hayes' statement, and Clara's contract analysis, were able to demonstrate a pattern of operations across 4 counties that constituted coordinated fraud. Miss Crane's name appeared in the territorial press within 10 days. Land commissioners connected to Crane were placed under investigation within 2 weeks. Operations in Sweetwater County collapsed not from a single blow, but from the rapid withdrawal of the infrastructure that had been holding them up. The Cheyenne backing, the legal cover, the assumption that there was no organized opposition in the county worth worrying about. They left Millhaven on a Thursday. He left without ceremony, settling his account at the hotel, without speaking to anyone. But he was simply gone, the way bad weather is sometimes simply gone present, and then not be behind only the evidence of the damage it had tried to do. Mercer's and Farlow's contracts were formally voided by the Territorial Land Court in January on the grounds of the disclosure violation Greer had identified. Where Mercer came to the Caldwell Ranch when he received the news, and he sat at the kitchen table and shook Clara's hand with both of his, which was a gesture so earnest and unperformative that it made her throat tighten in a way she had not expected. "Oh, how to thank you," he said. "Join the collective and run your ranch well," she said. "That's sufficient." He laughed, surprised, genuine, and she thought that was probably one of the better sounds she had heard in a long time. Flo sent a letter. It was not long, and it was not especially articulate in the literary sense, but it was one of the most honest letters Clara had ever received, and she had begun to consider honesty the highest standard by which a piece of writing could be judged. "Miss Whitmore, I am not a man who writes many letters. I want you to know that my ranch is my life, and I thought it was gone, and now it isn't, and that is because of you. What else to say except that my wife, you and Miss Caldwell will come for dinner when the weather allows. It makes a very good pie." Clara wrote back immediately, "Hello. We would be honored. We'll come in March. Tell your wife to save the pie. The wedding happened in February. It was not a large wedding. Clara had not wanted a large wedding. She had, in fact, expressed a preference for something so small that the word small felt generous, something practical and honest that matched the way she and Ethan had done everything else. Ethan had agreed without argument because he was constitutionally opposed to performing things that could be done plainly. Witness baked a cake. Greer came from Rock Springs and served as a witness, which seemed appropriate given that he had been present for some of the most consequential moments of the preceding months. Blaze came, and he brought Victoria. Victoria had asked Clara, privately, 2 weeks before the wedding, if her presence would be welcome. Clara had said, no qualification, no gracious hedging. Just yes. Victoria had nodded. She had not cried because Victoria Hayes was not built for visible crying, but something had shifted in her face that was the interior equivalent of it. She had begun and then stopped. We're all right, Clara said. You and I were all right. Victoria had looked at her for a long moment. Oh, she said. It was the smallest, most honest question she had ever asked. Because you told your father the truth when it mattered, Clara said. Because you came to Ethan's ranch looking for something you didn't find, and you handled that with more grace than most people would have. She paused. Because I think you're going to be a good part of this county's life. Let yourself stop competing with a version of things that was never actually going to happen. Victoria was quiet for a long time. Telling me to move on, she said. I'm telling you that you have a great deal to offer, Clara said. Offering it somewhere it can actually land would be a better use of it than offering it somewhere it can't. It was the truest thing she could say, and she said it without cruelty, and Victoria received it without crumbling. That particular exchange between two women who had been on opposite sides of something and found their way to the same side of something else was, Clara thought, one of the things she was most privately proud of. The ceremony was conducted by the preacher from Millhaven, a practical man of about 60 who performed the service with the directness it deserved. He asked Ethan for his vows. Ethan said them in the same way he had written that first letter plainly. Decoration, carrying all their weight in the simplest possible arrangement. Here was he. He said he would stand beside her. He said he would listen to her. He would trust her judgment and offer his honestly in return. He said he had not believed 4 years ago when he lost Eleanor that his life would contain another moment as good as the ones he had already had. He said he had been wrong. Clara held his hand while he said it. She did not cry during the ceremony. She had not expected to. A person who cried at the moments when most people cried. She cried when she cried at all, later, alone, when she had time to sit with the full weight of a thing. Cried later that evening, briefly and thoroughly. At the kitchen table after Ethan had gone to speak to Holt about the morning's work, burning steadily in front of her. She cried for the 24 years in Missouri. Cried for the girl she had been in that house, one who sorted correspondence and arranged other people's social lives and was never seen for she actually was. Cried for the joke, the cruel, stupid, accidental miracle of the joke. She cried because her grandmother had written in a book of poetry, the one who actually reads. Because one person, even one person, had seen her clearly, and that had been enough to carry her until the world arranged itself into a shape that could see her too. Then she dried her face. She picked up her pen. She wrote a letter to Missouri. She wrote it to Josephine. Not Margaret, not yet. Josephine, who had been the honest one, even when honesty was careless, who had written that embarrassing letter about their mother and the society luncheon without calculating the damage. Dear Josephine, I am writing to tell you that I am married. His name is Ethan Caldwell. He is a good man, better than that. He is an honest man, which in my experience is rarer and more valuable. The ranch is real and the work is hard, and I am exactly where I am supposed to be. I want you to know that whatever was intended when my name was sent to Wyoming, arrived here, was an opportunity, and I took it. I am grateful. I bear no one any grudge. I only want you to know, all of you, that I was not what you thought I was. I never was. I hope someday you'll be glad to have discovered that. Or your sister Clara. She sealed the letter and left it with the outgoing mail. Then she opened the household ledger for the new month and got to work. Spring came to Wyoming the way it always did, not gently, not with any particular announcement, but decisively, a decision made and kept. The snow pulled back from the lower ground. Coal that had wintered on the expanded feed supply, the feed Clara had corrected by 40% against all expectation. The feed that had held through one of the harder Januaries in recent memory came through the season in better condition than any year in recent record. Holt reported this with a satisfaction that he could not quite keep from his voice, and did not particularly. Collective's first formal transaction with a competing buyer, a substantial buyer out of Cheyenne, who had been introduced through Greer's contacts, produced a price per head that was 17% above what any of the ranch hedges received the previous year. Blaze had confirmed the figure himself twice, as though he did not entirely trust it the first time. The two smaller ranchers who had signed with Marsh, freed from their contracts, joined the collective in March. Their combined volume pushed the collective's negotiating position into a tier that attracted a second buyer, or third. By April, the Sweetwater County Ranchers Collective had 3 active buyer relationships and a price floor that none of them had operated above in the past decade. Reorganized the collective's administrative structure in April, creating a reporting system that gave each member rancher a monthly summary of the collective's activity, collective's financial position, and their individual share of the negotiated pricing. She wrote each summary in plain language, not simplified, the way Ethan's first letter had been plain, because she had found over the course of the winter that the thing people appreciated most was being treated as intelligent enough to understand the truth of their own situation. Summaries were 12 pages the first month. By the third month, she had refined them to 6 pages without losing any essential information. She found this satisfying in a way that she recognized there was now, as characteristic of herself, the satisfaction of compression, of finding the most efficient shape for a true thing. Ethan read each summary before it went out. He occasionally suggested additions. Once, in April, he suggested a deletion, a section she had written about the collective's projected growth that he felt was promising more certainty than the situation warranted. He said so directly, she considered it and agreed he was right and cut the section. She told him he was right. He said he was glad she thought so. Told him not to get used to it. He almost smiled. In May, a letter came from Missouri. It was from Margaret. I recognized the handwriting on the envelope and set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a moment before she opened it. She and each peacefully, the way she had looked at the first letter 18 months ago, waiting to see what she felt about it before she let it tell her how to feel. What she felt was curious, interested in what Margaret had to say. Afraid of it, she opened it. Margaret's letter was the longest thing she had ever written to Clara in their shared lives. It was 3 pages, written in the careful looping script that Clara had always associated with her sister's particular brand of managed presentation. Something in it was different from every other letter Margaret had ever written. This warmth was there. It was always going to be there. It was too deeply habitual to be absent, but the needles were gone. In their place was something that cost Margaret considerably more than cleverness. Brothers, I have been thinking about what you wrote to Josephine. Margaret wrote about bearing no grudge. I want to tell you that I have thought about what we did, what I organized very often in the past year. I have tried to frame it to myself in various ways, as you might expect. But the framing always ends in the same place, which is that we were unkind to you for most of your life. I, in particular, made choices that were unkind. I told myself it was just sisters, it was just family, it was just humor, I told myself many things. Just out a line here and rewritten it. I am sorry. I am saying it plainly because I think you are the kind of person who needs things said plainly. And I think I have known that for a long time and used it against you instead of honoring it. I am sorry. Clara read the letter twice. Then she set it down. Sat with it for a long time. She thought about what it had cost Margaret to write those 3 pages, about the 24 years and the dining room and the biscuits and the way her father had passed the potatoes, about the book of poetry with the cracked spine and her grandmother's handwriting, about the train and the big sky and the platform at Rock Springs. Yes. She thought, people are capable of more than the worst things they've done. That's worth remembering. She sat down and wrote back to Margaret. She wrote back with the same plain honesty she brought to everything. The forgiveness was real and stated clearly. Acknowledgement of the past was present, but not weaponized. The offer of something going forward was genuine. She wrote what was true. She wrote that she was happy. She wrote that she hoped Margaret was happy too. She wrote, "You were unkind. I was lonely. Both of those things are over now. And visit Wyoming if you ever have the courage for it. The winters are hard, but the sky is the most honest thing I have ever seen." She sealed the letter. She put it with the outgoing mail. She went back to the collective's May summary. That evening, Ethan came in from the east pasture where the spring calves were coming in strong numbers, and the kind of numbers that meant the winter preparation had held, that the expanded feed had done what she had calculated it would do. There's the 40% made on a cold November night by a woman who had been in Wyoming for 4 days had been correct. He came in with the specific energy of a man who has seen good things happen on his land and is carrying the satisfaction of it. He poured 2 cups of coffee without being asked. He set one in front of her. They sat down across the table. "The May figures are good," she said, not looking up from the summary. "I know," he said. "The Hayes calves are running particularly strong," she said. "Hayes is pleased," he said. "He told Holt he hasn't had a spring like this in 7 years. The collective pricing helped," she said. When ranchers aren't spending the season worried about what Marsh is going to do with their contract, they have more attention to give to the actual cattle." "I know," he said. Up. He was watching her, not the way he had watched her at the train station, with the careful assessment of a man determining what he had taken on. He was watching her the way he watched the things on his ranch that he valued most, with the quiet, specific attention of someone who has understood what something is worth and does not intend to take it for granted. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "I'm just looking at you." She looked at him for a moment. "Ethan, stop looking at me like that and help me with the May summary. Low figures don't reconcile, and I need a second set of eyes." He pulled the papers toward him. He looked at the figures. He found the error, a transposition in the 3rd column that she had been staring at too long to see, and he pointed to it without comment. She looked at it. "I've been looking at that for an hour," she said. "But you needed fresh eyes," he said. "Thank you," she said. "Ars," he said. They worked until the lamp burned low. No more corners, and outside the Wyoming spring pressed itself against the windows of the house, patient and unhurried, the way the best things are patient, not because they doubt they will arrive, because they know they will. Millhaven had not forgotten the story of the mail-order bride. Towns did not forget stories. It was one of their essential qualities, strong institutional memory that preserved both the best and the worst of what had happened within them. But the story had changed in the telling. What had begun as a piece of local amusement, the wealthy rancher settling for the plain woman from Missouri that nobody had expected to land, had become something else over the course of a Wyoming winter and a territorial fraud case in a spring calving season that everyone agreed was the best in recent memory. Women who had whispered in Dorothy Pierce's general store found other things to whisper about. Dorothy Pierce herself had started ordering Clara's supply selections directly, having noticed with the practical eye of a shopkeeper that when Clara Whitmore organized something, whereas it stayed organized, the hands at the Caldwell Ranch watched a quiet, plain woman arrive and quietly reshape the household and the supply systems and the winter preparation and the entire commercial landscape of the county, thinking of her as Ethan's mail-order bride approximately 3 months into her residence, and started thinking of her as what she was and who ran the operational side of the Caldwell Ranch. And Claire. Increasingly, the county's most significant agricultural collective, who had once stood at the back door with his hat in his hands and tried to explain a feed order problem to a woman he wasn't sure would understand it, brought his weekly supply reports to the kitchen table with the efficiency of a man who has learned that the fastest path between a problem and its solution runs directly through Clara Caldwell. Called her Mrs. Caldwell from the day of the wedding. He did it without being asked, without ceremony, with the same matter-of-fact directness that she had recognized in him from the beginning and had always respected. The first time he used the name, she had looked up from the ledger, had looked back at her steadily. Problem, he said, or she said, no problem. She went back to the ledger. Caldwell. The name fit the way the ranch had fit, the way Wyoming had fit, the way all the things that were actually hers had fit not easily, without effort, not without the cold and the hard winters and the drafty stove and the Gerald Marshes of the world, but truly, completely, in the way that things fit when they are the right shape for you and you are the right shape for them. When of that first year, the Caldwell Ranch was what it had always had the capacity to be: fully operational, financially sound, running with the organized efficiency that comes when the person managing the systems understands both the numbers and the people behind them. The collective had grown to include 7 member ranches. High negotiating power had attracted buyers from as far as Denver. Mother had written in December to report that Aldous Crane had been formally indicted on fraud charges in the territorial court, that the 2 land commissioners connected to his operation had resigned, and that the case had been cited in 2 subsequent territorial proceedings as precedent for disclosure requirements in commercial contracts. Clara had read Greer's letter at the kitchen table. She had folded it carefully and put it in the file she kept for documents worth keeping. She had gone back to the December summary, and on a cold January morning, exactly 13 months after she had arrived at Rock Spring Station with 2 bags and her grandmother's book of poetry, Clara Caldwell sat at the kitchen table of the ranch that was hers and looked at the household ledger that balanced and the collective reports that were accurate and the window where the Wyoming winter pressed its honest face about a girl in Missouri who had received a letter and made a choice for that girl, not pity, not nostalgia, complicated tenderness of someone looking back at a painful time. For that girl, the specific pride of someone who knows that the hardest decision they ever made was also the right one. Up a pen, she had written back, and everything, every single hard and cold and extraordinary thing that followed had been because she had done that one true thing, that one true moment, and refused to be someone's punchline when she could choose instead to be her own beginning. The lamp burned steadily. The ledger was open. The ranch was quiet with the particular quality of a place that has found its rhythm. Clara Caldwell picked up her pen and got back to work because the work was real, and she was real. And this life, built from the wreckage of a joke and the foundation of 2 people's hard-won honesty, was the most genuinely hers thing she had ever held. And she was never, not for a single day of the rest of her life, letting it go.